In the 17th century, a man from inland Portugal travelled halfway across the world, driven by faith, science, and an unwavering desire for discovery. His name was António de Andrade, and he was the first European to cross the Himalayas and enter mysterious Tibet. His journey, as audacious as it was forgotten, connected Lisbon to Tsaparang, passing through Goa, Agra, and the frozen gorges of the roof of the world. This is the story of the life of a missionary, explorer, and pioneer who challenged the limits of his time. Come and discover Portugal with us. Please like, subscribe, and leave your comment. Your support and opinions are very important to us. Thank you. António de Andrade was born in 1580 in Oleiros, in the current district of Castelo Branco. While still young, he joined the Society of Jesus, beginning his novitiate around 1596. He received a rigorous education at Jesuit colleges, first in Coimbra and then in Lisbon, where he moved in 1597 when the novitiate was established in the capital. At the prestigious College of Santo Antão in Lisbon, Andrade studied with renowned masters such as mathematician João Delgado and astronomer Christoph Krinberger. In the famous Aula da Esfera, sphere classroom of the Lisbon College, renowned for its teaching of cosmography and navigation, he acquired knowledge of astronomy and navigational instruments such as the astrolabe and the quadrant. This solid scientific foundation proved to be very useful in the explorations he would undertake. At the age of only 19, on 22 April 1600, the young novice set sail for the east on the ship São Valentim as part of the armada of Viceroy Aires de Saldanha. After a long 6-month voyage, a true 16th century maritime adventure, he landed in Cochin, on the Malabar coast in Portuguese India, on 22 October 1600. He then settled in Goa, then the capital of the state of India, where he completed his theological studies at the College of São Paulo and was ordained a Jesuit priest. Shortly afterwards, Andrade was sent on a mission to the Mughal Empire, settling in Agra, where the Jesuits maintained a presence at the court of the great Mughals. Gifted in languages, he learned Persian and local dialects from the Muslim Kashmiri community in Agra, a skill that would prove fundamental in the intercultural contacts that marked his life. In the early decades of the 17th century, Father António de Andrade distinguished himself in the mission in northern India. He became superior and visitor of the Jesuit mission in the Mughal Empire, serving alongside Emperor Jahangir, son of Akbar and father of Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal. In 1624, he accompanied Jahangir's entourage on a trip from Agra to Lahore, on the northwestern border of the empire. This would be the starting point for the most famous of his adventures, the overland journey to the Himalayas and Tibet, motivated both by Jesuit missionary zeal and by the fascination of discovering lands that were then legendary in the European imagination. At the end of March 1624, taking advantage of his journey to northern India, Father Andrade decided to deviate from the imperial route to pursue an audacious dream. In Delhi, he encountered groups of Hindu pilgrims heading for the temple of Badrinath, a remote sanctuary in the Garhwal Mountains in what is now Uttarakhand. Convinced that by reaching that temple in the far reaches of the Himalayas, he could find his way to Tibet, a land never before visited by Europeans, Andrade, together with his Jesuit brother Manuel Marques and 2 servants of the Society of Jesus, secretly joined the caravan of pilgrims. Thus began a Herculean journey. They left Agra at the end of March and for 3 months walked hundreds of kilometers north, crossing the highest mountain range in the world. The climb up the Himalayas proved to be full of superhuman trials. The missionaries climbed narrow mountain paths, suffered from shortness of breath in the extreme altitudes, and faced freezing temperatures and incessant snowstorms. Andrade described frightening scenarios, deep crevices in the ice that threatened to swallow the travelers, and slopes where they feared they would be torn to pieces in the air if they slipped. In certain passages, the snow fell so thickly that they could hardly see each other. The priest himself suffered from snow blindness and frostbite. In a letter, he reports that he lost part of a finger without even noticing, realizing only when he saw the blood flowing, and that his feet became so necrotic that they had to be cauterized with hot coals, with very little feeling given the numbness caused by the cold. These vivid descriptions bear witness to the extreme difficulties overcome by Andrade and his guides in the snow deserts of the Himalayas. After overcoming the Mana Pass at an altitude of about 5,600 meters, the priests finally entered Tibetan territory in the summer of 1624, becoming the first Europeans on record to cross the Himalayas and enter Tibet. On 20 August 1624, they reached the expedition's great goal, the city of Tsaparang, capital of the kingdom of Guge, also referred to as Coque or Guge in Portuguese sources. Tsaparang was a remote Buddhist enclave nestled in the mountains, near the sources of the Indus and Sutlej rivers, a place that until then had only appeared in the West in rumors about the mythical kingdom of Cathay and possible lost Christianities in Central Asia. Andrade reached the roof of the world, accomplishing an epic feat that his contemporaries in Europe could hardly imagine. Back in Agra, Father António de Andrade wrote an enthusiastic letter to the Jesuit visitor of India, André Palmeiro, reporting the discovery of that land and asking for resources to establish a permanent mission there. The repercussions of his achievement were immediate. With authorization from his superiors, Andrade organized a second expedition to Tibet in the following year, 1625, taking with him more missionaries and materials to build a residence there. Once the path through the mountains was reopened, he returned to Tsaparang and was warmly welcomed by the king and royal family of Guge, who fulfilled their promise to support the mission. In the ensuing years, the Jesuits built a small church in Tsaparang and began to preach the gospel in the local language. Although the number of Tibetan converts was modest, the missionary presence seemed to enjoy royal protection and flourish in that environment so far from Rome. Meanwhile, other Jesuits, inspired by Andrade's achievement, explored alternative routes through the Himalayas. For example, Fathers Estevão Casella and João Cabral left Bengal in 1626 and eventually reached the Kingdom of Bhutan and eastern Tibet a few years later. Andrade, for his part, remained attached to the Guge mission until the end of the decade. However, adverse winds would soon blow over that fragile nascent Christianity. The policy of favoring foreigners, carried out by King Tashi Dakpa in welcoming the priests, generated strong resistance among the local population and the Buddhist monastic elite. At the same time, external enemies coveted the small kingdom. In 1630, forces from the neighboring kingdom of Ladakh invaded Guge, deposed the pro-Catholic king, and established a government hostile to Western influence. The young Tibetan mission was quickly dismantled. The church was destroyed, the missionaries assaulted and expelled, and the few Tibetan Christians forced into exile in Ladakh. It should be noted, however, that António de Andrade did not personally witness the tragic epilogue in Guge. Perhaps sensing the impending difficulties or simply obeying the needs of his order, Andrade left Tibet in 1629 to take on new responsibility. His competence and fame earned him a prestigious appointment. In 1630, he was called to Goa to serve as provincial, supreme superior of the Jesuit province of the Indian Ocean. Thus, while the mission he had founded succumbed to distance, he was busy administering and training dozens of missionaries in other parts of Asia. Father António de Andrade held the position of provincial of Portuguese India between 1630 and 1633, after which he became rector of the College of São Paulo. During this period, he also held the position of deputy of the Inquisition Tribunal of Goa, an influential but potentially thankless position as it involved religious and moral discipline in the colony. Andrade was known for his rigorous zeal, a quality of missionary which in an inquisitorial role meant strict enforcement of the rules. In early 1634, at the age of 53, Andrade was preparing to return to Tibet in an attempt to resume his interrupted mission. However, his life would be tragically cut short before that could happen. On 3 March 1634, during a dinner in the refectory of the College of São Paulo, the priest was poisoned and became seriously ill. He agonized in pain for more than 2 weeks and died on 19 March 1634. He was 54 years old. The news shocked the community, and an official investigation was opened by the Inquisition of Goa to determine who was responsible. The results revealed an outcome as surprising as it was macabre. The perpetrators of the murder were 2 fellow Jesuits, motivated by internal grudges. Dissatisfied with the austere discipline that Andrade had imposed as superior, they conspired to take his life, possibly with the veiled support of powerful figures opposed to the priest. The scandal was quietly hushed up, no one was formally punished, and later hagiographic accounts portrayed Andrade as a martyr for the faith, suggesting that he had died as a victim of hatred towards Christianity. However, contemporary documents confirm that his death was a sad inquiry in reverse within the church itself, resulting from personal and institutional tensions in 17th century Goa. Thus ended prematurely and mysteriously the life of one of the most intrepid missionary explorers of the so-called Age of Discovery. Father António de Andrade's legacy is outstanding and multifaceted. In just a few years, he turned the ancient dream of connecting Christian Europe to the isolated lands of Tibet into reality. He was the first Westerner to accurately describe the Tibetan plateau, providing the world with unprecedented information about the geography, climate, fauna, and peoples of the Himalayas. Armed with his astrolabe, Andrade even calculated the latitude of Tsaparang, approximately 31 degrees 29 minutes north, giving European cartographers a concrete reference point for that remote region. His ethnographic observations on Buddhist religious customs, language, and Tibetan culture were the first of their kind made by a European in situ. The importance of Andrade's travels was soon reflected in the dissemination of his letters and reports. The first letter, written from Agra in 1624 after his return, was published in Lisbon in 1626 under the title New Discovery of Gran Catayo, or the Kingdoms of Tibet. This and other travel accounts had an enormous impact. Within a few years, they were translated into Spanish, Italian, French, Latin, German, and other languages, spreading throughout the curious Europe of the 17th century. The news of the priest in Tibet amazed scholars and fueled the Western imagination about Tibet as a distant kingdom in the mountains, inhabited by possible Christians and full of secrets. In fact, Andrade's description strongly influenced European conceptions of Tibet in the following decades, long before new missions ventured into those parts of the world in the 18th century. We can say that he opened a geographical and cultural door that would remain half-closed until the explorers of the colonial period. On the missionary front, although the work in Tibet did not last, Andrade laid the foundations for an initial dialogue between Christianity and Tibetan Buddhism. His courage inspired other missionaries to seek alternative routes through the Himalayas, such as to Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan, where Jesuits and Capuchins made incursions in the 17th and 18th centuries. Although those early attempts did not take deep root, they left a valuable historical record of the encounter between such different worlds. For centuries later, the figure of António de Andrade was long forgotten, overshadowed by the maritime heroes of Portuguese expansion. However, his memory has been rescued by historians and publicly recognized. In his hometown of Oleiros, a statue was erected in his honor, and schools and streets were named after him, honoring the high status of this native of Oleiros in the panorama of discoverers. In 2024, on the 400th anniversary of his arrival in Tibet, commemorative expeditions and documentaries revisited Andrade's footsteps in the Himalayas, highlighting the relevance of his adventure today. Thank you for discovering Portugal with us. If you liked the video, please click on the like button and subscribe to the channel to follow our new releases.